He was of such exalted genius withal that we may truly declare him to have been given to us by heaven for the purpose of imparting a new spirit to architecture, which for hundreds of years had been lost. This was how Giorgio Vasari described the architect Filippo Brunelleschi in his work Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors and Architects. Welcome to Italy Beyond the Guidebook with Deborah, editor of Italy News Online, and Sarah, a licensed tour guide in Florence, aka Flow Easy. In today's episode, we're looking at the man who created the iconic cathedral dome in Florence, Filippo Brunelleschi. But to start, let's give our listeners some context. So what was Florence like as a city at the turn of the 15th century when Brunelleschi was working? What kind of intellectual and social world was he operating in?
Well, the competition for the north doors of the Baptistery heralded the start of what we call the Renaissance today. Is this rebirth of the ancient world and the desire to equal and surpass the classical model. They were consciously translating Latin and Greek texts. As a city, Florence was economically vibrant. There were rich families and corporations commissioning grand works of art. There was competition to surpass the ancient world and each other. The figure of the artist also changed from a simple craftsman, evolves to a humanist and scientist. They studied ancient philosophers, humanism, and the Neoplatonic Academy was thus born in Florence.
Most people know Brunelleschi as the architect of the Dome of Florence, but he trained first as a goldsmith and sculptor. How did that craft background help shape the way he thought about buildings and engineering?
Well, the art of a sculptor and goldsmith both require the skill of construction and meticulous precision. He was an apprentice to a goldsmith, and it was during this period that Brunelleschi also studied the science of motion, in particular weights, wheels, and gears. He became a master goldsmith at the age of 21. 3 years later, he takes part in the competition for the north doors of the Baptistery. The competition piece was a scene of the sacrifice of Isaac using 4 sheets of bronze. Sounds easy? It wasn't. The first step, you'd have to model the figure in clay. Once dry, you then coat that figure with a layer of wax, shape the wax into the statue or relief, add another layer, this time a type of paste, which is a combination of burnt oxhorn, iron fillings, and cow dung mixed with water. You're adding then more clay layers. Once finished, it's then placed in a kiln and baked until the clay is hardened. The wax then melts and pours away from the holes at the base. Then melted bronze is poured in. Finally, the clay is removed to leave the bronze, which needs to be worked, chiselled, engraved, polished, and gilded.
The lost wax process.
Yeah, which was fraught with problems. 7 artists had taken part in the competition, but ultimately it came down to 2. We have Lorenzo Ghiberti and Filippo Brunelleschi. The competition pieces are actually still conserved within a museum in Florence called the Bargello Museum, and you can see the competition pieces side by side, and they give us this great opportunity to study both pieces and decide on which one we would have chosen.
Well, the men that mattered at the time, they chose Lorenzo Ghiberti's, didn't they? So how did that defeat change the course of Brunelleschi's life and arguably the course of Western architecture?
After he lost the competition for the north doors of the Baptistery, Brunelleschi went to Rome, supporting himself financially by making clocks. He studied classical antiquity, the Pantheon. Back in Florence, after roughly 10 years back and forth, The experiment of linear perspective was conducted by Brunelleschi in 1413, and arguably this changed the course of painting with this rediscovery. And we have Masaccio, a Florentine painter, and his work of the Madonna enthroned with angels and saints applied Brunelleschi's scientific perspective for the first time. And in our following podcast, when we talk about Donatello, we also see that Donatello uses this linear perspective within marble for the first time.
Bringing it down a notch or two, I was watching a Philomena Gunk clip the other day, and she asked the expert whether they started building the pyramid from the bottom up or the top down. Stupid question, but not actually when it comes to Brunelleschi's dome.
No, because the problem for the Florentines is they weren't starting from the ground, but at a height of about 170 feet. There was a massive hole. The diameter of the cupola was more than the Pantheon at 143 feet and 6 inches, and the shape was octagonal, 8-sided. It wasn't round. There were obviously existing machines used to hoist these materials, but these were inadequate and they were far too consuming. Were taking too long for the task ahead. The first thing Brunelleschi's got to do is actually got to design and invent machinery. And so he designs a tiller, which was driven by oxen, that turned a vertical shaft, which raised and lowered a hoist with a screw that changed gear from up, down, forward, reverse. He transported 35,000 tons of material.
Wow.
To build his cathedral dome with this tiller driven by oxen. He also invented what we would see as a modern day crane. It was called a castello hoist, where there was a machine that could move and place material with precision. You can imagine Brunelleschi's background with regards to being this clockmaker helped enormously with his studies and the inventions of this machinery. He knows about cogs, wheels, motions. So innovative were Brunelleschi's machines that Leonardo da Vinci studied and drew detailed drawings of them.
Wow. So the master did learn from a master, basically. Now, is that man Ghiberti again? Because it wasn't all, easy peasy for Brunelleschi to get the dome commission either, was it? So their rivalry seems to have carried on throughout their lives. What was their dynamic between them during the construction of the dome, particularly?
You can imagine Brunelleschi has lost the competition to his kind of younger rival with regards to the doors of the Baptistery. So you can imagine Brunelleschi would not have liked the idea of his nemesis also being given the title of Capo Maestro for the dome. The model for the dome was Brunelleschi's. He was the man with the ideas and the knowledge. His design for a wooden chain is then selected, and as work is about to begin, Filippo decides to become unwell. Therefore, he's leaving the responsibility of the chain, which is Brunelleschi's idea and design, to Lorenzo Ghiberti. Now, Brunelleschi was renowned for being very secretive with regards to his plans, and so work grinds to a halt with Lorenzo at the helm. Lorenzo had begun work on the beams, but he didn't know what was going on. So Filippo Brunelleschi will miraculously recover. He returns to work, and then he insinuates that Lorenzo's work is rather inferior and below standard, because if it wasn't, well, why has work stopped? Filippo had used his sickness really to expose the inadequacies, as he thought, of his rival. Ultimately, though, Brunelleschi will be acknowledged as the true genius and architect of the dome.
Sneaky man. So he was essentially the world's first construction manager as well as the architect. So, in a modern sense, he
Yeah.
would have been the man with the clipboard.
Yes, he filed the first industrial patent in the Western world for a crane system to move marble from Carrara. He's a genius.
Yeah. And yet, people always think of Da Vinci, don't they? There we go.
Yeah. Well, the reason being is because Leonardo da Vinci, he studies and draws Brunelleschi's machines. A lot of people thought that it had been invented by Leonardo da Vinci.
Because Brunelleschi didn't put it to paper necessarily, other than that first patent.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ah. Well, there you
Because
go,
he's
you see.
secretive.
If you want to be remembered, got to put it down.
Yeah.
Okay. So going beyond the dome, we mentioned during the Medici episode the Ospedale dei Innocenti. Is it true the Foundling Hospital was funded by Brunelleschi's Goldsmith Guild?
No, it was actually
Oh,
paid for by the Silk Guild. However, Brunelleschi designed the building.
with that loggia. Yeah, because it's got a
Yeah,
very famous loggia, which is known not just as a landmark of architecture, but of Renaissance thinking in totality. Why is that?
because the building features a rather elegant loggia, mixing classical elements with precise mathematical proportions. 3 is the perfect number, the magical number. There are on the loggia, we see there are 9 arches, as well as 9 windows, and there are 9 steps. Brunelleschi uses the multiple of that symbolic number. The distance between the columns equals their height to their depth of the portico. So maths is this rationale, which is conveying a divine message.
Okay, all going back to the divine, all going back to the Trinity, the three. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it feels when you're walking round the historic centre of Florence, it feels like every church, chapel, and hospital that you look at have Brunelleschi's name on it. But if we move to the Basilica of the Basilica of San Lorenzo, this was essentially the private church and mausoleum of the Medici family. What does Brunelleschi's relationship with the Medicis tell us about how architecture, money, and power worked in Renaissance Florence?
Well, Brunelleschi was undoubtedly the preferred architect of Giovanni de' Medici, and Giovanni de' Medici was the founder of the Medici fortune. He opens up the first Medici bank. Architecture was linked to the classical world of knowledge and wisdom. Renaissance Florence was moving from the Dark Ages into Enlightenment. It was about money. The Florentines had introduced this double entry bookkeeping. So 2 columns. And this is what we see in Florence. We have neat and tidy columns, all mathematically proportioned. The problem for Florence, and in particular the Medici, is that banking is lending money. You're charging interest on that loan. And so this is classed also as a sin. This is usury. So how to use their innovation in a way to aid their salvation, but through commissions and heavenly architecture.
Hence the preponderance of chapels and churches,
Yeah.
including cute little, well, say little, Santo Spirito on the other side of the river in Oltrarno. Often overlooked by tourists, but it's very similar to San Lorenzo, isn't it? And it's, again, a Brunelleschi
Yeah, because it's
church name.
all, you know, yeah, it's all mathematically proportioned. He uses a very kind of plain color palette to accentuate that harmonious proportion. of a church.
Mm. And again, another. So we've got the Patsy Chapel, the Patsy's not being the best friends of the Medicis, at Santa Croce. So this breaks with the Gothic mystery and grandeur with that restraint and geometrical harmony that we've been talking about that Brunelleschi is well known for. And it became a highly influential model for future architects. But when you visit it, because if you're going on church, you kind of don't know what you're looking at unless you have a tour guide. What should you look for when you're actually inside it?
It is very similar to the old sacristy in San Lorenzo, because obviously it's designed by Brunelleschi. It's actually one of his last projects before he dies. Okay.
Okay.
And in fact, he dies before it is completed. The Pazzi Chapel, though, is art of perfect proportions. It's this geometric space, and this projects tranquility, peace, a sense of calm. It was constructed as a square, and each side is 11.66 meters, and it's topped with a circle. So this is heaven's perfection expressed through the circle. Earth is symbolized by the square, which is solid and structural. So heaven, circle, earth, square.
Okay.
And these are all mathematical rules that God has created the universe with. For the altar, you have a rectangular space with a cupola, and you look up and you have 4 evangelists. There are 12 apostles and 12 windows with this oculus. So we have this light of God that's streaming through the lantern at the top of the dome. And we have these 12 apostles who symbolically brought light to the world through their teaching. There's a frieze, and you find the book of Revelation. There are several mysteries also within this little small dome. There are constellations that appeared on the 4th of July, 1442. And the question is, what happened on that date? And why is this same constellation seen within the San Lorenzo Chapel as well?
Yeah, that is weird because when I saw that, I was like, there must be something for the 4th of July, 1440. But there's nothing, is there? There's no historical significance to that date for those constellations to be up there, to be painted on the ceilings, and for them to be on two chapels from rival families. It's really quite bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
No. So one of those unsolved mysteries. You never know. Dan Brown might write another book about it. Or was it already on it? I don't know. Okay. Leading on to my Da Vinci. Much like Da Vinci, later in the century, Brunelleschi had wide-ranging interests. So, as we mentioned, he had the hydraulics, he had the watchmaking, he had the practical mechanics, all of these things that helped him create stuff. But is he better understood as an architect or an engineer or something that we don't really have a word for?
For both, really, but he is really the forefather of the Renaissance. He's a genius. Uh, and I suppose we've got to think to ourselves, if it wasn't for Brunelleschi, would we have had, others following in his footsteps, such as Michelangelo, Leonardo?
Yeah.
He's really the man that's this protagonist that's pushing this new Renaissance forward, this new thinking as well. It's science and art, it's mathematics.
Yeah. It's not just somebody drawing a rough shape of a person with a tree in the background, is it? It's
No,
not just
no.
plonking up a square building. Way more than that.
We've got to imagine also what type of world are they living in as well? They're living in a world where there's lots of death as
Mm,
well. You can imagine there are lots of outbreaks of plague and pestilence. You're going to be losing your siblings, your parents, your friends. And so it's also a way of looking into the spiritual to give you some comfort, really, to what's happening in and around yourself. Okay? And we don't see, God in the same way as they did then.
no,
God is their salvation. You look around you, you think there's got to be something else. And so
better.
this
Mm,
is yeah, exactly.
yeah,
So
but he brought the
again, it
logic.
shows,
Mm,
yeah,
brought some
it's
logic to it.
salvation.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
without taking away that hope. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so Brunelleschi's buildings serve as textbooks for future architects, including Michelangelo, but he never wrote his stuff down, never wrote down his architectural theory, did he? So, how did his ideas spread across Europe if it wasn't through written treatises? Put my teeth in.
Treatises.
Treatises.
It's really through the words of others, those that witnessed the construction of the dome. He does have a biographer, Antonio Tucci Manetti, was his first biographer, writing in the 1400s. He writes the life of Brunelleschi. But in terms of those details with the domes, etc., no, he doesn't really write them down. So it's others looking, and artists such as Leonardo is then you know drawing them and studying them, and he's writing it. He's writing it down.
Okay, personal question now. When you stand on the other side of the river and you look down across the old town, what do you feel when you see Brunelleschi's work?
It's majestic, and without exception, Brunelleschi created the masterpiece of Florence.
So it wouldn't exist without him, basic as it is. I mean, yeah. Was there any
For 100
particular?
years,
No, go on,
I
carry
think
on.
they have to, for 100 years, roughly, no one had come up with a credible plan on how to build the dome. And when people come to Florence, they look in the cathedral square and they're taken aback. The cathedral square is the architectural jewel of Florence, and crowning that
Yeah.
square is Filippo Brunelleschi's masterpiece. We should be talking about Brunelleschi, yeah, a lot more than we do.
No.
And often when I take people around, no one's heard of Filippo Brunelleschi, but everybody wants to climb that dome. Everyone wants to climb 463 steps to the top. Yeah, it's got a brilliant view, but you wouldn't be climbing it if it hadn't been for Filippo Brunelleschi.
No. Well, you'd be climbing, but it wouldn't be a dome that you'd be looking at as
No,
you're doing it.
yeah,
Or, I mean, if you look at the landscape of Florence, it's there, isn't it?
exactly. Yeah,
Massive. It just
yeah,
dominates the skyline, and if like if you do a skyline of London in a silhouette, you do a skyline of Florence, a skyline, it's Florence because of that dome.
yeah.
That's it.
It's literally the crowning glory of Florence.
Yeah. So that's the crowning glory, but is there one that you would say that is seriously underappreciated and that you'd recommend every visitor to see?
The interior of San Lorenzo literally epitomizes his architectural sense of space and was the first Renaissance church in the world. If you want to understand Brunelleschi, then I'd head into the San Lorenzo church. And you can connect everything together as well because, one of his best friends, Donatello, is decorating the old sacristy. And also you have that connection with the Medici family because, they have their private chapel, the old sacristy there, so you can link everything together.
Yeah, it is a Renaissance masterpiece in its entirety, really. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So now we know about the man that nobody knows about, Brunelleschi, even though they recognise his name.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And if you've enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for Donatello, which is in 2 weeks' time. And if you haven't seen the Medici one before, go back, or St. Francis, or Caravaggio. They've all gone before. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, add a comment, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.